Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on various lands of First Nations people across Australia and beyond. And on behalf of everyone here today, I would like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, both for their unique connection to the lands on which we meet and their relationship to our shared environment, whether it be land, water and air. And that this special and ancient relationship can be found in First Nations people across the world. I myself am sitting in Sweden, a land with continued occupation of the Sami people, and I recognise the burdens and challenges shared by all First Nations people. So feel free to use the Zoom chat today and tell us where you're dialing in from. So let's make some introductions. My name is Matthew Gordon and I am a recovering public servant and also the client executive and senior associate at Capire. And at the moment, I'm working remotely from a carless island in the middle of a Baltic Sea archipelago. And I've been with Capire for about 5 years. And I'd like to now introduce my colleague, Kathleen Webster. Kathleen, where are you dialing in from today?
Hi everyone, I'm a senior consultant at Capire and I've been here for about 4 years, but most recently I've been working at the newly launched Brisbane office. So we've been here for the last couple of months, or 4 months or so, but previous to that I was in the Melbourne team. Thanks, Matt.
Welcome, Kathleen. So for those who don't know, Capire is a community engagement practice of about 25 people, founded nearly 18 years ago. We work exclusively in the community engagement space, and you can find us everywhere from warming up a town hall in a small regional community all the way to designing engagement strategies in boardrooms for major infrastructure and urban development projects. And as an organisation, we're really passionate about giving every person a voice in decision making. There's no project too small or too large for our consultancy. And in all the work that we do, we really seek to understand. And that is the basis of our name, Capire, which is Italian for to understand. So thank you for joining our 45-minute webinar today. The webinar is being recorded, and along with the slides that we're presenting, we will share both of these on our website later this week. So if you've missed anything or you've heard something that you want to sort of share with colleagues, we'll make sure that you can do that. We also have a range of other publications and materials that can also be found on our website at capire.com.au. But today we're talking about engagement frameworks. You know, what are they? Why they matter? What they include? What are the components of a framework? And how to put them into practice. And we will be sharing our reflections and your reflections along the way. Sorry, just one sec. So we're certainly blown away by the number of people that have an interest in this topic. And so we've prepared what we think will be an informative and interactive and engaging session. We also have a special guest today, so look forward to meeting this mystery person who will bring online in about 15 or 20 minutes, and we will keep you in suspense. And of course, if you would like to get in contact with Kathleen or myself to further discuss any of the ideas that we're sharing today, feel free to email us at matthew@capire.com.au and kathleen@capire.com.au, or head to our website and complete our contact form. I'll share both of these in the chat shortly. So to keep this webinar as interactive as possible, we have some questions for you now and throughout the webinar. And for this, we'll be using the Mentimeter. You can join Menti by scanning this QR code or jumping to menti.com.au and using the code here. We'll post a link in the chat. Our first question for you is, if you had to use one engagement tool for the rest of your career, what would it be and why? Kathleen, what would be your engagement tool? You're stuck on an island somewhere and you have to use this tool for the rest of your career. Which tool would you use and why would you choose it?
It's a hard question, Matt, but I know we had a chat about it earlier in the week, and well, I think you can't get past a one-to-one conversation. I do have a bit of a cheeky answer that I think a project engagement web page is really one tool, but it's more than one tool, and you can tailor it to the project needs, whether it's a map, a discussion forum, links to publications, interactive resources. It can be scaled up and down to meet different project budgets, and it allows people to participate in their own terms, whether that's the time of the day, or they can spend as much or as little time as they need to review the content. But yeah, it's a bit of a cheat answer because it's many tools in one.
So you've chosen the multi-tool, the engagement
Yes.
multi-tool. Well done.
Yeah.
I think for me, my engagement tool would be a relational meeting. I feel like a relational meeting is where two people can get together. It might be yourself and a key stakeholder or someone who's sort of highly involved in, a program or a project or an initiative. And you just sit and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and you sort of share where you've come from, your values, the things that keep you up at night. And you're really looking for that kind of common ground between you and this person. And it's through that you can share insights and knowledge. You can, get some feedback on something. But you can also build an ally or a bit of a coalition around your project. So I love the relational meeting. But let's see what others are sharing. What are the engagement tools that you would use for the rest of your career? We've got your eyes, like that one. Your heart. Wow, this is very sort of ephemeral responses here. The mighty networks. My silence. I like that one too, actually. That's very interesting. And we've got some others there. Kahoot, because it's fun and inclusive. Networks, workshops in person. Nothing can beat a in-person engagement and hearing in-depth stories and narratives, face-to-face conversations. Exactly. Lots of great ideas there. Well, let's quickly move on now to our next question for you, which is, does your organisation have a community engagement framework? Does your organisation have an engagement framework? I would expect most might have something in place. Maybe a few people maybe no. There's a couple of people with no framework. Somewhere in between. Maybe another few seconds. Okay, right. So look, most of us have an engagement framework in our organisation. It's a good thing. Well, let's one final question before we kind of get into the substance of our webinar. How would you rate your organisation's commitment to engagement? And perhaps to that engagement framework. We have a strong commitment, organisational wide, maybe grassroots, somewhere, somewhere in between. Our organisation lives and breathes it right through it. We've got some people that love it, but, don't have a full commitment. There are some departments or units or teams or team members that don't quite get it. We've got a bit of a split draw here between organisational wide commitment and somewhere in between. Some at a leadership level, that's interesting. Some at the grassroots level. Okay. Very interesting. Well, let's get into it. For the first part of this webinar, let's explore why engagement frameworks matter. So I'm going to hand over to you, Kathleen, to talk us through that.
Thanks, Matt. And I'll start off by saying, as consultants, we're supporting organizations in the engagement space, and that could be to develop or execute plans and strategies. So this is something that we do quite often, or very often, and it's gives us a unique opportunity of being able to see the common challenges and experiences across the different projects and different organizations and sectors. And for this webinar today, we've neatly organized the main patterns that we see into two main themes. And the first one is about the systems and processes for engagement. And these are broadly in three different headings, but the top one being about many organizations juggle with the multiple projects, stakeholders, and each of these have their own timelines and priorities. And without a structured approach, engagement can become reactive, and it's more responding to the issues as they arise rather than being planned and proactive. And this can lead to inefficiencies, mixed messages, and a bit of missed opportunities to build trust with the key stakeholders. The next pattern that we see is that engagement is no longer nice to have in many industries now, and it's required as a part of compliance, project approvals, and a lot of projects are requiring to demonstrate social license as well. So, however, not all organizations have a clear process in place on how to meet these expectations and requirements, and this can lead to rush processes or less genuine approaches to meaningful engagement, which yeah, not ideal. And then the third key system and process theme that we see is that even when engagement is happening, organizations can often struggle to define what success looks like. Are the engagement activities making a difference? How do we know? Without the clear measures of success, it's difficult to demonstrate the value of the engagement for an organization and how to improve it over time. And the second theme that we find for the challenges is more the internal aspect, so the mindset and commitment to engagement. And this is often the part of the engagement framework that gets overlooked when it's being developed. For example, we might work with an organization that has an engagement policy, but not all teams that should be referring to it are aware that it occurs or aware that it exists, or maybe there's confusion of how to apply it. Yeah, so there's a bit of a lack of strategic alignment between yeah, what's planned and what's an essential part of the decision making. The next one is about the limited organizational commitment. And this is when, even if the engagement is well understood, it doesn't always translate into the actions. And there may be competing internal priorities, limited resources, or simply the leadership or internal buy-in isn't quite there to back up the engagement activities. But when engagement is embedded into the culture, it can result, if it's not quite embedded into the organizational culture, this can lead to increased project risks and ultimately a breakdown in trust with those key stakeholders. So yeah, something we want to avoid. That's where the role of engagement frameworks come in. And this is how we'd like to address these structural and cultural changes. And the engagement framework plays a critical role in this process. Firstly, it brings the structure to what can sometimes be an overwhelming and fragmented approach to all the different little engagement activities across the organization. And instead of different teams working in silos across the organization, reacting to different issues as they arise, a framework can help provide a clear and coordinated approach from the whole organization. Which brings us to the second point, which it's an engagement framework helps with consistency. So no matter who is leading the engagement, there's a shared understanding of the expectations, processes, and the best practices for your organization. And this both helps to build the trust internal to the organization, but also external to those critical stakeholders. And last aspect I want to mention here is that it creates transparency and it serves as an agreement between the organization and the stakeholders. It outlines who will be engaged, how and when, and this sets realistic expectations that can be used to help strengthen relationships over time. And yeah, we find that a well-structured framework doesn't just make engagement easier, it makes it more effective and impactful. So I've done a lot of talking now, so we'll go back onto Menti to ask a few more questions, but just bear with me while I set the screen up. We'll go back onto the same link.
So now let's turn to you guys for some reflections. So I'm really interested, what are the telltale signs that an organization has lost its way in this space? What are some of the indicators that an organization is sort of lost in its kind of approach to engagement? Let's see what's coming up. Consultation, tsunami, and fatigue. Sounds dreadful. Scrambling and reactive. No budget given to engagement. That's an interesting one. Misplaced compass, inconsistent, internal conflict. Trying to take shortcuts. Reactive. What are your thoughts here, Kathleen? These are some of the things that we kind of commonly see and hear. There's a few interesting ones. Confusing messaging.
Yeah. I think if you link into the topics you're about to delve into as well, the culture aspects as well.
Yeah, depressing culture, poor relationship management, the drop in involvement after commissioning. It's very interesting. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing, everyone. And look, I think we've set the Menti so you can only add one response, but feel free to jump and continue the conversation on the Zoom chat. Be very happy to keep the conversation going there. So let's now look at, we understand now why an engagement framework is important, and we sort of understand that it, can allow us to bring together a kind of a consistent, effective and impactful approach to our engagement. Sort of start to break down what are the core components of an engagement framework. And a strong framework isn't just about having good intentions. I think it needs to offer clear structures and processes and a culture that supports engagement at every level. And so we'll quickly flick through these these are sort of building blocks. We'll just kind of put them together. There's probably more, or they can maybe be cut and divided in different ways, but this is just a bit of an illustration. So the first we start with is a policy, and this defines the engagement purpose, the goals and the principles of our engagement. Or to set clear roles and responsibilities, governance structures that ensure accountability sits around our engagement effort. And it's almost like the kind of the principal document, or that describes a vision for how this organisation will be an engaging organisation. Next, we have some kind of typically is like a guideline or kind of a strategy document. Maybe it's a bit more internal focused, and it's here that we typically see stakeholders being mapped out. We have different tools and templates, or a library of tools and templates that can be used. We have plans and approaches to managing risks. And what we know is a sort of a strong kind of strategy ensures that, engagement can be is proactive rather than reactive. It sort of helps bring, the policy kind of to life. And, it's about really articulating a vision for the implementation of our organisation's sort of engagement purposes and objectives and principles. Next, and maybe, this is, not necessarily kind of a document or anything in particular, but it's a component of our framework, which is, a skilled workforce. It's absolutely essential. Engagement is only as effective as the people delivering it. So, investing in training and professional development builds that kind of confidence and that capability amongst staff. And what's interesting, I think, in this particular component, and what Capire is starting to see more of it, and we love this, is in the sort of the current kind of cost of delivery crisis, if you will. We've got tight budgets and, maybe like public sector doesn't have as much money as it used to. A lot of organisations are asking practitioners like Capire to not only support the delivery of an engagement process, but while we do that, build the internal capability of project teams while we're delivering a project. And this kind of creates that opportunity to not only do good engagement as an organisation, but help an organisation become an engaging organisation in their own right. And ultimately, and God forbid I'm a consultant, this might put us out of a job, but that's okay. We will find something else to do in the meantime. We think it's a really important part of an engagement framework is, making sure you've got a skilled workforce to deliver upon it. Next, we look at monitoring evaluation. So as Kathleen mentioned, without measurement, we can't really kind of track or know whether our engagement efforts are working or not. And this is an important, to kind of define the key metrics or indicators and have that routine kind of auditing to track progress and refine and learn about what approaches work and what doesn't and so forth. And I think the policy and the monitoring evaluation are kind of two components of the framework that really need to closely align and connect to each other. On one hand, goals, objectives, on the other, measures and results. And so the policy ought to be really clear about who is responsible for the measuring and evaluating engagement and how that happens and when it happens. As Kathleen also mentioned in a presentation, processes, these are critical parts to get right. Clear guidance on when and how to engage, as well as systems for data management and stakeholder tracking that ensures an engagement is well coordinated and effective. And in some cases, it might be appropriate for engagement projects to be documented by some kind of project management office, where there are really clear and direct steps taken to ensure engagement activities are not only started and delivered, but are reported on appropriately and include that really vital step of kind of closing the loop, letting communities know what we've done with their feedback. And now that we've built the thing or done the thing, how do you kind of continue that, ongoing involvement with those communities and those stakeholders? And without that kind of management process thing documented, there, I think, is a risk that, there's sort of a corporate lapse of memory or forgetfulness. It was like, oh yeah, we forgot to kind of close that loop. So having that kind of external, as a project management office or whatever it might be, ensuring that engagement is seen through, I think is really important. Without that, I think communities and stakeholders ultimately become less trusting. And finally, culture. We put this in because it's something that Capire takes a close look at when we do work. As the old adage goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast or something like that. Culture is the sort of the currency of the delivery. And, we need a culture that supports a good engagement organisation. So, engagement needs to be kind of embedded in the mindset of the organisation. not only do we have a policy and that everyone's kind of aware of it, but there's a strong commitment to it from all levels, from leadership all the way through to frontline staff. And when Capire is deciding on what projects that we help out with, we're often looking for those cultural cues. For example, and I just saw a comment earlier, having senior leadership in the room at the planning stage, is a really powerful kind of cultural cue for us to kind of go, hang on, here's an organisation that takes this really seriously. Or sometimes it might be just the kind of the confidence that project teams have, about the expectations of an engagement process. So cultures are a really big part of it. And so by aligning all of these elements, I think an organisation can move from that kind of ad hoc engagement to a sort of a structured and strategic and impactful approach. Let's go back to you. I'm kind of keen to I'm interested to know from our audience, what do you see as the sort of the status of each component in your organisation? How well developed is each building block across the board? So let's take a quick look at that. We've got lots of room to move, learn, and develop all the way through to we're really kind of strong in this particular component. So keen to share your thoughts. Put the Mentimeter up again, and let's see what comes through here. Looks like a bit like a horse race, doesn't it? I might give people a few more minutes. It's sort of hard to comment on this until we get a bit of a picture forming. Looks like monitoring evaluation is always on the back foot here. And that's interesting. I mean, when we look at a lot of engagement policies, and one of the things I notice is, I don't know if you see this, Kathleen, the monitoring evaluation section of a policy or a strategy document is always kind of like the last page, and it's only about 3 paragraphs or something. And it's sort of
definitely.
an afterthought, I think. It's a pretty middle of the run here, isn't it? We've got sort of an average around 3 across all of those. So most people have it developed, something there, but not as strong as it could be. Good to see cultures in the mix. But yeah, look, monitoring evaluation. It's a 3-legged rocking horse, that one. So in this race, interesting. Well, let's maybe pick up on some of these themes a jiffy. I'm going to just quickly move to some common kind of place frameworks, if you will. Now we can't have really a webinar on engagement frameworks without sharing a few of these. For example, the International Association for Public Participation, the IAP2 spectrum, very common, regarded maybe as the sort of the gold standard as a model for engagement. And while models like the spectrum are now sort of regarded as best practice, they do come with limitations, which I feel are kind of important to share at this point. Standardized participation kind of frameworks can limit some flexibility in our approach. And, IAP2 provides a really good structure for public participation, but it can be rigidly applied, and that I think reduces kind of adaptability and creativity in the consultation process. And so we need to kind of be aware of that. That might make it harder for, to tailor some engagements around local context. The IAP2 spectrum itself, I find it somewhat one-dimensional. It focuses around engagement solely as a sort of an engagement frame. From one end, we promise to keep you informed about decisions that we make, right through to the other end of the spectrum, which is a promise to implement what you decide. And, we all know and realise in our work that engagement can go a little bit beyond just kind of decision making and, who's kind of controlling the the decision making process. So we might look to different frameworks that kind of allow more creativity and adaptability. And the next one I also would like to share is a commonplace one, maybe less common, also an IOP2 framework. It's a contemporary engagement model. This one, I think assesses engagement approaches from, who is leading and who is taking action. And what I really like about this model is how it identifies engagement on kind of decision making and includes engagement where an organisation, say a local government authority, is leading an initiative where it might require action from the community, which we might call a behaviour change project. An example might be, rolling out a new regime for curbside collection of wastes led by a local government where engagement aims to support communities to sort of change the way they act and dispose of waste and recycling materials, for example. On the other end of this model, you have an engagement approach where community leads and the organisation acts, leading to community advocacy. And a few years ago, I remember a large growth area council in Melbourne's Western metropolitan area used to have a sort of an advocacy division, which converted community issues related to limited infrastructure into advocacy actions at the state and federal level. And I think that's a sort of really interesting way to think about an engagement approach for an organisation. And of course, there's other kind of modes, that sort of maybe where community is both acting and leading, community planning. And it's in this kind of context and engagement. An organisation might be there just to sort of host, support, facilitate, kind of, help that engagement process on behalf of the community, but not necessarily lead or act within it. So I think this model I find offers greater kind of capacity for some sort of flexibility and creativity. And as a model, I think reduces the risk of these sort of frameworks becoming, just ways to justify decisions rather than foster genuine engagement. The last one I'm going to share before we jump into our next section where we're going to interview our special guest is my favourite, and that's the Capire triangle, which was developed by Capire's co-founder Amy Hubbard. And I can assure you this has been my favourite model well and before I started working at Capire. But what I really like about the engagement triangle is it recognises engagement is more than just informing decisions. It can also be about strengthening relations with people and stakeholders, or building capacity and through sharing of knowledge, or in some cases, some or all of these engagement purposes. And I think as a sort of a spatial tool, it can really help assess and get an organisation thinking about where engagement sits. Is it sort of one or more of these objectives? Is it more of one than another? And then behind the tool is, a sort of a matrix that helps you kind of choose which engagement methods support what type of engagement purposes. I think it's hugely powerful and one worth considering in your engagement arsenal. So in conclusion, there's all sorts of commonplace models that can be really powerful and set up an organisation for success, but there are benefits and drawbacks. And when used prescriptively, these frameworks can really stifle creative approaches and that are required in certain contexts. So I think engagement practitioners, we really need to use critical thinking and apply contextual or context-specific approaches, coupled with a really good engagement culture to drive authentic and meaningful involvement in our communities. So, look, we've been talking a long time. We've got another 10 minutes, and I wanted to introduce, and it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest, Tatiana Resk, who is a dedicated professional with a strong background in community engagement and public sector. And the reason we've invited Tatiana today is because she brings a really thoughtful and strategic approach to her work. She's helping organisations navigate all sorts of complex stakeholder environments and build meaningful connections to the communities they serve. Throughout her career, Tatiana has contributed to her expertise to several organisations in the community and utility sectors, most recently with Water. And Tatiana is currently in the strategic engagement team at Barwon Water here in Victoria, and has a deep and practical experience driving positive and community and customer outcomes through her work. Tatiana, welcome today. Thank you. Where are you dialing in from?
Hi, Matt. Hi, Kath. Great to see you on the screen. I'm likely to say that I'm dialing from Brazil. I just arrived a couple of days ago.
Amazing. So we've got Brazil, Stockholm, and Brisbane. This is really engagement without borders, everyone.
That's good.
Over to you,
Thanks.
Kathleen.
Oh yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt. And we're yeah, really keen to have you here, Tatiana. We've been working with you for a long time, and yeah, really keen to hear your insights today. And the first question that we are going to ask is about how to make the engagement frameworks unique to each organization. And that's kind of following up from what Matt was discussing before. We've been discussing it as a team at Capire a bit too about the challenges of having the rigid best practice engagement frameworks and how we can use this as a base. But yeah, just understanding the drawbacks and the benefits of having these rigid frameworks. So yeah, we'd love to hear about how organizations can adapt the common engagement framework to suit an organization's unique needs.
Thanks, Kath. That's a really great question. And reflecting what you just, some of the slides you just shared, and I just want to say hello to everyone on the screen. I can't really see anyone, but I think that there's quite a few of you out there across Victoria, maybe around other places in Australia or the world. I don't know, but lovely to thank you for having me here today, and inviting me to share some of my experiences. That's I feel very fortunate to do so. But Kath, back to your question, and some of the slides I just shared before, particularly the three engagement models or frameworks that you noted here today. I think it's important to start with that there is not a one size fits all approach. I think that if we could put those three frameworks together and mishmash them somehow, they would come up with a better product. They all have great elements to them, and also, as Matt noted, has some limitations and can make the work tricky on the ground. I think, and thinking about the participants here today, and some of you, about 30 plus of you, have demonstrated you have already have a framework in place in your organization, so that's fantastic to see. Others we're kind of in between or in the process of developing, and a couple of others not quite there yet. I think in each of those opportunities and scenarios, you are in a good position to, if you have an existing framework, it's a good time, find the right time or the good time in organization to review it. That can look in many different ways, but frameworks are not a static piece of work. They're ever changing, and they need to be really flexible in that regard. So there's always an opportunity to review the framework you currently have. If you're sort of sitting in between and not sure where to shoot at in your fence and which one to adopt, even better opportunity, because there you can be more creative and really ask some deep questions to your organization, to your C&E team, and across the business. And if you're really not sure where to start, this is a good conversation to be part of, because you're going to be exposed to quite an introductory level, I think, information and experience sharing. So that's good. In my opinion, Kath and Matt, I think the number one thing you need to do there is whatever framework you have in place or you're adopting or thinking to adopt is it's a good step to look at what principles and values that framework is proposing that you need to follow or apply to do what we would call quality engagement. And do a bit of a health check with your own organization around what are our values and principles and goals, and are they in alignment? How does the organization already meeting some of those proposed engagement framework values and principles? And do a health check. It's a good opportunity to, I think, from the top, kind of blue sky thinking and sort of bird's eye view, have a look make sure it really fits for the purpose of your business and how you approach your engagement as an organization. There are some very ambitious ways of approaching engagement work and policy and practice. Check against the resourcing levels. Not everybody is equipped or have the resourcing to do a citizens jury every year. So just make sure that you are, you are really adapting for the fit of organization, your resourcing levels. It aligns with operational processes. Some engagement elements of engagement framework, might really push you to do some more empower work at the empower level, as an example. But perhaps the maturity of your engagement program approach in readiness is not quite there yet, or perhaps your leadership style, it's not as flexible that would require that level of openness. Or perhaps the project they're working near is highly, highly confidential. So, there are so many elements that to consider. So I think the key message here is definitely make sure that whatever framework or frameworks you want to adapt it to your organization, and make it your own. Non-negotiables for me are engagement principles. So those are non-negotiables. We can't really reinvent. I mean, we can add some more to the list, but I wouldn't take them out. And I don't think we want to be reinventing that wheel. I think finally as well, when it's kind of leads into some of the previous conversations you're having around assess the buy-in organization for engagement, find your internal champions, top down, bottom up, because you're going to need their help. So yes, those are sort of the main things.
I want to just pick up on that. I just want to pick up on that. We've got a question from Gemma on the chat, and she asks, are there any tips for encouraging buy-in from executive, to endorse? I mean, you mentioned bottom up, top down, you've got to do both. But have you got any tips on how you can get executives in the room and endorsing engagement frameworks?
I think exec very busy people, decision makers. They have a lot of on the table. So the way I would approach that, Gemma, is that I would look into some case studies and some examples of other organizations that they take the engagement quite seriously. They're quite mature in their journey, and demonstrate how the engagement program led to a process and decision-making style that solved problems for the organization. Because engagement teams and engagement work is here really to listen and to help solve problems that are big in the business. If you can demonstrate that engagement is not like, the add-on element at the bottom of the list, that is at the heart and is essential for the business to thrive, I think you're in a better position to negotiate with a exec.
Yeah, so thinking about like what sort of corporate risks engagement can kind of solve for, things that might be top of mind for executives.
And also about, perhaps at this point in time, this not might be such a risk, but if we let it unfold over time, we're going to, it's going to be a big issue down the track. So it's about engagement allows us to be strategic, to really be able to foresee smaller risks or bigger risks down the track. And more than anything, I think engagement is about listening to your customers, into your audience, and your community, whoever they are. And nowadays, not only from a regulation point of view, our social license commitments require that kind of approach and thinking.
Thanks so much, Tatiana.
Yeah, after you, Kathleen.
Oh, sorry, Matt. Yeah, so I hear the key points are to review the framework and make sure that it you keep it flexible, and then it's a working document and also that you're reviewing it at the right time for the organization. And the principles, values, and goals are really important to do a health check of as a priority, and also cross-checking the amount of resources required to do the adaptations and the changes. So matching the resources available to what you're proposing. So yeah, thanks. That's really insightful. And we're running a bit over time, Matt. I was just checking. Yeah. We've got
I want to pick up on one issue I think that sort of came up is the monitoring evaluation. Yes. So we saw it was the sort of came last in the race, as it were, in terms of where organisations are at. What are the ways that you would evaluate an engagement framework, to ensure that's working, and how do you adapt it if it does need tweaking?
That's the beast, I think, of that slide you had, Matt. And you're right to say that M&E is often afterthought. And that's across various industries. And I think I tend to joke around when I'm talking about evaluation with a meeting or a team, that when I mention the word evaluation, you start seeing people leaving the room or wanting to leave the room. I think for evaluating an engagement framework, the number one thing you got to start with is that as you're building a framework, adopting, reviewing it, make it really clear what successful delivery of a framework looks like. Like you mentioned before, evaluation starts from the beginning, not at the end. I think that's a really important point. We tend to leave evaluation for a paragraph in your framework or at the last step in your process. For you to be able to evaluate your framework, you need to do it throughout its development and implementation and as an ongoing basis. Think it this way. I think that aside of being engagement experts in what we do, we also got to put the learner's hat on. And as we're engaging and delivering our framework and putting it in practice, we are constantly picking up gold nuggets along the way. So don't forget about those gold nuggets. Find an informal and formal way to capture the learnings of your engagement framework development, delivery, and rollout. And I guess, in my opinion, I think you do need to have a regular review of your framework. Annually, that would be ideal. But along the way, at every engagement program process you put in place, make sure they're being evaluated. Make sure that you're collecting feedback, not only externally from those you're engaging with, but from your own organization. Look at process. So how was the process? How effective it was? What was the reach in this context of engagement framework? What level of exposure people across our business understand, are aware of our framework? How often do they use it? How relevant it's to them? How easy it is to use? These are all really important questions to be asking on a regular basis. And informally, if you're working with a team on a project, you're going to help them engage about something, along the way, just maybe spend 5 minutes of each meeting going, so, we did work up to this point in our project. What are some of the reflections you've got so far? What is working well for you? What is not? That's more the organic, informal way. And you may not be able to act in every insight you get from an evaluative or reflective point of view, but create a journal, create an insights register. What you can act on now that's small and doable, do it then. But if it's something big that is going to involve exec and board and big decision makers, just make sure you make records of them and identify the right time to go back and to review how the framework's working. It's not a static, it's a continuous improvement type of work, and it's never going to be perfect. There are lots of internal and external pressures that is going to make your framework constantly in tension with something, and it needs to be adapted. So it's constantly adapting. So I think acceptance of that concept, we can build beautiful policies and have it sitting on our desks for 5 years. I can guarantee you by year 2 or 3, the document is going to be looking very different. So yeah. That's about
really
it.
interesting. Thank you, Tatiana. That's been really insightful, and a huge thank you for jumping in and helping us out with today's webinar. I'm sure there's lots more questions that we could be asking you, and we could probably talk for the next couple of hours, and maybe we need to run another webinar. But before we wrap up, and we've got a few minutes over time, I apologise to everyone. We just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who joined the webinar today. We really appreciate your time and some of the insights you've also shared. So where to from here? So if you're thinking about how to get started internally, consider who needs to be involved from your organisation. Are there key decision makers or teams that should be part of that conversation? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you about that. If you'd like to have a deeper dive in your organisation's engagement approach, we'd be happy to set up a one-to-one. You can just reach out to Kathleen or myself, or simply jump onto our website. I'm sure Tatiana would also, I don't want to throw you in the mix, but you'd be happy to answer any questions people might have along the way, and we'd be happy to make those introductions as well.
And Matt, may I just say kind of a bit of context here? I'm joining the webinar today, not necessarily in alignment or as part of my role on my current organization, but really just someone that has practiced the profession for a really long time. So I'm happy to speak to anybody from that capacity.
Yeah. We really value the experiences that you can bring to those conversations, Tatiana. Thank you. We'll also be publishing this webinar, so you can revisit any part of this discussion, and we'll share also a link to some other resources, including a community engagement frameworks publication that we've published a few years ago. But thank you again for being part of this session, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Enjoy the rest of your week, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Kath.